See Chris Fitz in his most spine-tingling video yet. It's live. The video. It's live! As he ranks 10 of the Universal Classic horror films.
If it fits! Or at least the 10 that are streaming on the Criterion Channel right now. And fair warning, there will be some spoilers sprinkled throughout. And let's be honest, none of these movies are scary in the way that The Ring or The Babadook is. Two of my favorite scary movies. But I'm going to be trying to put myself in the mindset of someone from the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
I will even play you chess for her. Provided if I win, they are free to go.
Coming in dead last is 1934's The Black Cat, directed by Edgar G. Ulmer and starring both Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. Let me say up front that both of these men are fantastic. I have no idea what their relationship was like in real life. I didn't get a chance to listen to the You Must Remember This episodes on them yet, but I'm going to this week. They have terrific chemistry together and seem to really enjoy playing off one another on screen. There are 2 films on this list with both men starring, and they're the best part of both of them. Anyway, The Black Cat tells the story of newlyweds Peter and Joan, yada yada yada, then they end up trapped in a house with a maniacal Boris Karloff. There are cults, there are long-lost daughters. The plot is very convoluted, and that's my biggest problem. The thing that makes all of these Universal horror films so great, or at least what makes the best of them so enduring, is their ability to take these big ideas and distill them down into commentary about very relatable human experiences, and this one it's all plot. To me, it feels like an overly long episode of The Twilight Zone. And listen, I would consider my life a success if I could make something as good as an overly long episode of The Twilight Zone, but when you compare it to the rest of these films, something has to be last. Is it scary? No. I was way too confused by this film to ever be scared by it.
Soy Dracula. No podía usted ser más oportuno.
So I actually learned this when I started watching these films, but in the early days of sound, they would shoot 2 versions of the same film, one in English and one in a foreign language to export to foreign markets. The cast of this Spanish language version would film on the same set with the same script after the English crew had wrapped for the day. This version was directed by George Melford and stars Carlos Villares as the titular Dracula. You'll see a lot of people calling this the superior version of Dracula, and there are a lot of really interesting differences between this and the Lugosi version. In fact, the Spanish language version adds a whole 30 minutes to the runtime, which is kind of my problem with it. I had issues with the English version of Dracula, which we'll get to, but the Spanish version just takes those issues and makes them 30 minutes longer. I'll talk about the English version of Dracula, just know that everything I say about that goes for this, only longer. Is it scary? There's some creepy, there's some dread, I would say not scary.
Raven is my talisman.
They were really taking some liberties when they named this after the Edgar Allan Poe poem The Raven, a film directed by Lou Landers and again starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. It tells the story of Richard Volin, played by Lugosi, a brilliant doctor who saves a young woman after a car wreck and becomes obsessed with her. He's also a masochist who loves torture devices based around the writings of Edgar Allan Poe. Karloff plays Edmund Bateman, a murderer on the run who asks Lugosi to surgically alter his face so that he can live without the constant threat of being caught. Lugosi agrees, but disfigures him and tells him that the only way he'll fix it is if he helps him kill the young girl's father, who earlier had confronted Lugosi about his obsession with his daughter. If you couldn't tell, just like The Black Cat, this film's plot is convoluted and can often feel like an overly long episode of The Twilight Zone, but what makes The Raven work so much better than The Black Cat is that everyone's motives are really clear. Karloff, a hostage to plastic surgery, might be silly, but at least we understand it, and as long as you're willing to embrace the sillier aspects, the film can be really engaging. Again, Karloff and Lugosi are great together. It's fun watching their dynamic shift from The Black Cat, where Karloff played more of the villainous mastermind. Is it scary? Not scary. It's actually more fun, more akin to a thriller than a horror film.
Children of the night. What music they make.
I might get some hate for rating this so low, but when you put this film up against Frankenstein or The Invisible Man, forget it, it can't hold a candle to those other films. Released in 1931, directed by Todd Browning, and of course starring Bela Lugosi as Dracula, this is the film that started it all, and Lugosi deserves all the praise he gets for this film. He is mysterious, he is charismatic. It's hard to imagine what this film would be like without him. It's actually not that hard because we literally have another film with another actor made at the exact same time with the exact same script and sets, so it's actually very easy to imagine what it would be like without him. But this is not a bad film. There are these huge, gorgeous, gothic set pieces. Dwight Fryer is another standout performance as Dracula's lackey, Renfield. It would be very easy to make this bug-eating man silly and over the top, but Fry manages to make you feel for a man teetering on the edge of sanity after his mind has been taken over by the vampire. But you know what? It's not easy being first. This was fairly early into Hollywood's transition into sound, and it suffers from not having a score. A lot of it feels very stiff and static. It's just kind of dull. And so like I was saying earlier, the Spanish version of Dracula, just compound that with an extra 30 minutes. Is it scary? How can anything scare me ever again after seeing this bat? You tell me. Creepy yes, scary no.
You will not remember what I show you now, and yet I shall awaken memories of love and crime and death.
Starring Tom Cruise and... I'm kidding. Just a year after Frankenstein was released, Boris Karloff returned as the Mummy in this film directed by Karl Freund, or more appropriately, he returned as Imhotep, an ancient Egyptian high priest who was resurrected by some English archaeologists. He believes that a woman named Helen is the reincarnation of his lost love, and so he tries to kill her so he can resurrect her, and then they can live out the rest of their undead lives together. I wanted more Mummy. This is a great film about a man obsessed with getting back his lost love at any cost, but where's all the mummy? Give me that mummy. That first scene with the mummy is terrific, and I just wanted more of it. I have a feeling that's what a lot of people said when this film was released, because the sequels to this film, as far as I know, I haven't seen any of them, were a lot more mummy and a lot less substance. It's also funny to me that Imhotep was just hanging out in Egypt for 11 years that we don't see.
10 years ago, he found too much. Was it 10 years ago?
He gets resurrected, stumbles out into the desert wrapped in bandages, and then... what? Does he get a job? Does he get an apartment? What was Imhotep's life like for those 11 years? Is it scary? This might be the first film on this list with some scares. The opening scene when the mummy comes back to life is scary. The pacing is strange. The scene where a guard finds Imhotep in the museum, tense. Yes, I would say this one is mildly scary.
Hurry, the dogs, they are hunting you.
Oh! The Wolfman was released in 1941, directed by George Wagner and starring Lon Chaney Jr. as Lawrence Talbot, the Wolfman. Let me start off by saying that Lon Chaney is such a creep in this movie, and I don't mean as the Wolfman. He starts out by peeping on a young woman through her window with a telescope and then aggressively stalks her until she agrees to go on a date.
Tell you what we'll do. We'll take a little walk tonight, then we'll talk it over.
No.
See you at 8.
No.
Into the woods to meet a fortune teller. He also gets pissy when she wants to bring along a friend to make sure that he doesn't murder her.
If you don't mind, Larry.
Well?
And he subsequently gets bitten by a werewolf and becomes the Wolfman. It's hard for me to believe that even by 1941 standards, Lon Chaney was acting appropriately with this woman, so it makes it hard to really care about what happens to him. The emotional payoff is not what it could be if it were about a less despicable character. And let me just say that the movie doesn't think that he's despicable. But those woods, the cinematography, the design of the Wolfman, and if you can believe what the movie wants you to, that this is a nice, loving, budding romance, then this is a beautifully tense and atmospheric film that feels different than all the other films on this list, with its open, foreboding woods rather than the tight, narrow, gothic castles that we see so much of. Is it scary? I would say that there isn't one moment as scary as the opening of The Mummy, but overall the movie builds up more dread and fear at what might happen next. For a film called The Wolfman, we don't get much Wolfman until near the end of the film.
I can tell you something about this place. My boys call it the Black Lagoon, the paradise. Only they say nobody has ever come back to prove it.
The latest entry on this list, from 1954, Creature from the Black Lagoon, was directed by Jack Arnold and is a story about a group of scientists looking for evidence of fossils of a prehistoric creature, or a bunch of people go to Gilman's home and kill him for no good reason. I'm not afraid of water, but I am afraid of not knowing what's under the water, and so take this with a grain of salt, but I think this film is the scariest of all the films on this list. The image of Gilman's hand reaching out of the water is scary. He gets less scary when you see his full body, but I think it holds up fairly well. The image of his mouth struggling to breathe on land is a nice balance of funny and frightening. This probably isn't as good a film as The Wolfman or The Mummy. There aren't a lot of emotional stakes, and a lot of the characters make really dumb decisions.
Mark, we're not finished here yet. We've got to make a study of that grotto. We've got to collect photographs.
I've got all the proof I need. Get going, Lucas.
Mark, we're not going anywhere until we've finished our work.
Decisions that they inexplicably change moments later for arbitrary reasons.
We didn't come here to fight with monsters. We're not equipped for it. We came here to find fossils. Later, we can come back with a properly equipped expedition. Be reasonable.
But I like this film more, and it's on my list, so I'll do what I want. Is it scary? Yes, it's scary. If I was a kid seeing this in a movie theater in 1954, I would definitely have nightmares. And also, I'd become Guillermo del Toro, so obviously. I know. What can I say? I'm a free thinker. I'll go against the grain. Nobody's gonna make me put this on the top of my list. Directed by James Whale, what many people would consider his masterpiece, the monster, having survived the first film, goes on a journey discovering his voice,
Bride.
experiencing kindness, and ultimately having his heart broken by the woman who was made to love him. I don't know, it all feels kind of silly to me. The monster talking, the scene with the little people in glass jars, the opening with Mary Shelley recapping the events of the first film. It's campy, and that's good. I enjoy camp, and there are some really tremendous scenes, especially when they're bringing the bride to life. There's a nice emotional core to it. Boris Karloff turns in another great performance as the monster, and Elsa Lanchester is, of course, iconic as the bride. It's third on my list. It's a great film. Why am I getting so defensive about ranking it below Frankenstein? Is it scary? No, like I said, it's more campy than scary.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Again, directed by James Whale, I do think this is the superior Frankenstein story. Many people would describe this film as a story about scientific overreach or the dangers of playing God, but I think that puts too much emphasis on Henry Frankenstein, when the real focus is on the monster. It's a tragedy about a creature who never asked for life, but was forced into it, never given the opportunity to understand it, persecuted for it, and ultimately has it unjustly taken away with only a brief glimpse at its beauty. Although not really taken away, because he comes back for multiple sequels. There's some really haunting imagery in this one, from the monster extending his arms up to the sky to feel the sun for the first time, or a father carrying his dead daughter through the streets, having been unintentionally drowned by the monster. Karloff, in his first time as the monster, is pitch perfect as a childlike creature in the body of a beast, and of course the Jack Pierce design makeup is iconic. That's the second time I've said iconic in this video. I don't know how I feel about it. Is it scary? Haunting. Scary though? No.
I'll show you who I am and what I am!
That's right, The Invisible Man is hands down my favorite of all of these films. Another film directed by James Whale, The Invisible Man is about Jack Griffin, who discovers the secret of invisibility, and it drives him mad. He goes on a murderous rampage. For me, it is the perfect balance between gothic horror and B-movie science fiction. Claude Rains is incredible as the Invisible Man, turning in a really terrifically unhinged and yet nuanced vocal performance. The visual effects still hold up. Yes, they do. This was 1933, people. Give them a break. They hold up. James Whale is firing on all cylinders, especially in those opening scenes. I will say things start to lose some focus when the film opens up and becomes a bigger story about Rains wanting to cause havoc all over the world. It would have been nice to stay small because that's when the film works best. Is it scary? It's tense. It's unnerving. I don't think it's scary though. That's my list. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in some more spooky stuff, you can check out my video on the book and movie version of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Vampires. It's like the bride.